Welcome to Keeping IT Brief, where we break down the hottest trends, explore the latest innovations, and chat with the industry's brightest minds. Get ready for a fast-paced journey into the world of government IT, where we keep it short, sharp, and super insightful. Stay tuned for expert insights, predictions, and tips that you won't want to miss. If you're ready to stay ahead of the game, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Mary Ann Brown. I'm being joined today by Moshe Nelson, a partner at Guidehouse, and Beth Absher, the Enterprise Supply Chain Risk Manager for NIH. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
So let's start with Beth. What are some of the macro trends affecting supply chain resilience today?
I think from the NIH perspective, knowing that we have a $50 billion budget and 27 institutes and centers that have their own separate appropriated budgets, it gets a little complicated from the government perspective, but we are in no way unique in that regard. We know that government agencies, as well as our commercial supporters, have additional perspectives. One of the macro level issues that I see is, the logistics disruptions that happen from anywhere from first mile to last mile. You have labor transport issues. You have everything from putting your eggs in one basket, thinking that technology is going to solve every single problem that you have. What it really matters is whether you have the right people, processes, and technology in place. And so there's this synergy that comes into play to help manage those risks that happen. Here at NIH, we learned during the pandemic that shifting from an industrial demand to a consumer-based demand that changes the eaches and units as we get them into our agency. And why that matters is because there's a huge bottleneck, if you will, as production shifts to meet that demand. And so from the government perspective, we have to be very clear about what it is we need and want to forecast that real demand.
And from the industry side, so I would try to divide these factors into a few different areas. One, on the global scale, we've seen significant changes in the trends of supply chain management. Different geopolitical changes that are occurring, started in the pandemic, has been occurring, throughout Asia as well as Europe and the Middle East, are affecting and directly affecting supply chains of the United States and the federal government. There are policies that we've been putting in place from a national perspective that's really looking at bringing the supply chain closer to continental U.S., closer to domestic partners. Specific relationships in the Pacific arena to try to ensure that some of our key minerals and production commodities are accessible from partners that are effectively reliable. So we have this macro level changes in global supply chain providers. The other one is technological innovation, and what we're seeing with generative AI, with the production of larger data sets, different volumes and types of information. And quite frankly, what's needed is this integrated approach of factors that affect the supply chain, whether that be issues from a health perspective, from changes to geopolitical events throughout the world, specific changes in weather and disasters. All these factors, as well as finance and economics and fraud, and you sort of build this comprehensive list that's need to be considered as part of critical supply chain manufacturing. So when we look at it, we're looking at these global trends, that's technological innovation, and all these multiple variables that are needed to coalesce in order to make effective decisions for your critical supply chains.
Okay, so now, in your opinion, what are fundamental components of a resilient supply chain?
I think first and foremost, and Moshe touched on it too, technology, our business processes, certainly our data, but behind all of that is really innovative minds that are putting that into play. So talking about policy formulation and how do we translate that from a great idea to implementation, the folks that are drafting policies like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act requiring domestic components and domestic products, for example, for PPE, personal protective equipment. Really great idea. And our supplier base is behind it, but there are also realistic impacts that that stop us from meeting that 100% of the time. So what do we do in that space? For example, nitrile gloves. NBR is a component that makes up more than 70% of a nitrile glove. It is found in Malaysia. It is not found domestically. So what do we do to grow the domestic base here in the US? And what do we do in the meantime? Because there's an interim space where we have to meet the supply chain needs in real time. So I think part of it is getting our partners on board from the supplier side. So we need to really have a robust conversation with industry. We need to bring them into the mix. We need to ask them, what are their pain points? What is stopping them from getting it to the last mile? Are we ever going to achieve 100% compliance for domestic products? Maybe in certain commodities, yes, maybe in others, no. And really being able to relate back to our policymakers, hey, look, we can get 80% there. What are we going to do for the other 20% measure? And so I really think we have to remember that our technology and our systems are only as good as the innovative minds and willing partners behind that. Folks like Moshe and others in industry that say, hey, look, you know, we've been doing this for 30 years and we have seen this trend happen. Are you seeing the same in government? What's your demand signal? And we in the government have to be very clear about what our needs are and are not, and make sure that we're speaking to the same benchmarks. This is what success looks like for the government. And so we need to know from the same equation, the other side, what does it mean for success in industry? How do we meet in the middle? And how do we share that data? Some of that is normalizing our data, making sure we have shared data in a singular repository, and then speaking the same language. Define your terms. What does it mean in government, and what does it mean in industry? So I think those are some parts and pieces, and I know we don't have a lot of time. This is such a subject I'm so passionate about that I could go on and on. But Moshe, please.
Oh boy, I mean, that hard to follow up, Beth. I think you covered all of the specific fundamental components and principles. I would just hammer a couple points and that you had stated here. You know, the data, governance around the process, collaboration between industry and in this case government, right? As much line of sight in planning as possible, ensuring that on the industry side, data and communication regarding the supply chain, regarding every aspect of its life cycle, are provided as a partnership, with government and implementation. One last piece, which I think we're finding, as we talk to many of our partners in government, across federal and state and local, is this combination of in the supply chain risk management focus of IT, cyber, the procurement, procurement organization, and risk, right? And all of these components working collectively in a comprehensive supply chain risk management program that essentially are able to, address all factors that are needed to be considered, whether that's cyber risk that's going to be affecting the supply chain, both internal to government or to, first, second, third tier suppliers, whether that is the availability of the industrial base to plan effectively for the procurement supply chain. And then from a risk perspective, how does SCRIM fit into the overall enterprise risk management framework of an agency? So there's efficiencies, integration, and ultimately this comprehensive success. Thanks.
Okay. So now, what are some common challenges faced in the supply chain resiliency? I know you mentioned the overseas issue, but what else do you have?
Certainly labor shortages. They're certainly getting the right frame of mind. So do we have innovative minds that have the energy to think strategically as well as, practically? And that's a hard case. We've been asked to do more with less in the government. I know that others are feeling the pinch, probably in industry as well, but we have mandates that we have to meet. So each person as an acquisition professional, for example, and I'm in logistics currently, I do NIH logistics, and that's $2 billion worth of accountable property assets, knowing where everything is, whether it's a laptop or a centrifuge, biosafety cabinet. It's also having the agency fleet. I have to have my fingertips on how that's operating. The performance metrics there are built into the machine. We can see how well it's running, when it needs to be maintained, but no one really has a single finger on a single pulse for the enterprise supply chain risk management. So what do? Well, you start from what you know. And I think you lean forward and you look for willing partners in industry, your external stakeholders, your supplier network, innovative minds out there in management councils, in industry councils, but also internally. So we have great innovative minds in the IT cybersecurity space. So they're working for technology and tools, software as a service, and supply chain illumination technology. These are all great things, but then you have to train people on them, and these tools are only as good as the person who created them. So did they build it with your success in mind? As a corporation, you have a certain perspective that I know Moshe can speak to. From government side, we have to meet all these mandates. Did we manage to code that in? Okay, that's great. Do people know how to use it? Did we build it with the end user in mind? Because remember, the average person at the end of the day is saying, gosh, I'm so exhausted. I did my compliance checklist. Okay, they're registered with sam.gov, but it doesn't stop there. The supplier network, we need to go down through 3 and 4 and 5 layers. Were they affected by geopolitical instability? Are we ever going to get that resource for that last mile because of the events that are happening overseas? Is there a shortage now in this component because of a catastrophic weather event, or God forbid another pandemic, which we've all lived through? And so we recognize that we have to be agile and flexible. I think some of that is recognizing what we can and can't do and being able to ask for help. We do not have to be the smartest person in the room, but we do have to know where to find that smartest person on that subject matter and gather those people together and have them exchange in a frank and open dialogue the realities of the situation. And so what we're doing at NIH, setting up the Enterprise Supply Chain Risk Management Council, we've involved acquisition and logistics. We have our IT technology partners. And then throughout that framework, we also have our policy experts to show them, hey, look, we understand translating policy into action involves guidance, and every step of the way, our physical access security. So folks we have getting on campus, we have to involve our first responders. And so really every single person at NIH is involved in the supply chain. It's getting them to recognize that we are all a part and piece of this and we can impact it positively. So I really think it's a cultural change in government. We've had a policy for 2 years, and we are just now getting to a more mature structure of enterprise supply chain risk management. It's happening all over. HHS is doing a great job, and the flow down, CMS is leading the way, and we are learning and we are adopting what's already been built. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel there. We're bringing the smart people together and saying, okay, we're gonna borrow this, and we're gonna bring together what makes sense for our agency. And so we're listening and we're learning and we're implementing with our willing partners.
That was so great. I I think from some key points here that I really want to hammer on. There's a professionalization of the supply chain management and the supply chain risk management space that continues to evolve, but also needs to be recognized, right? What we're discussing here are truly interdisciplinary skill sets that need to be brought together in order to effectively manage every aspect of this life cycle. That's a challenge, right? And it's a challenge with how organizations currently are set up and manage entire supply chains, where it may not be a comprehensive, sort of end-to-end management process where everything is, all the processes are aligned, the data are aligned, the systems are aligned. That's going to take time. And there are a lot of enablers, that are coming from industry, that are also being pushed in policy, from the government perspective, that will help us get there. So solving some of those large challenges of how do you bring this interdisciplinary, quite frankly, professional career into place, and how do we move all of these various factors and aspects together and manage them from a governance perspective that has the planning and communication of those plans clearly articulated. That whether that's demand planning from the buyer side, or manufacturing planning from the supplier side, right? How's that communication effectively happening on both ends? How's the IT and systems being brought together and worked effectively with the CIOs, and with essentially program offices, mission offices, business offices, to ensure that you have the capability in place in a way that's dynamic and versatile. Supplement it with information that may be coming from businesses or from mission offices that create a truly 365-degree look at that supply chain, right? And that it's a supply chain risk management. And then ultimately, how do you create a culture? And I think Beth was getting at this, like, how do you create a culture that thinks about innovation and improvement and recognizing that, supply chains are dynamic, and so too should the planning, the decision making, the actioning of that supply chain risk management process. So it's a cultural shift where it takes a lot of collaboration, it takes all these disciplines coming together, and then enabling systems, processes, data and technology that make it effective.
Okay, so I know you guys have touched on that a bit, but how do you build that culture of supply chain resilience across the organizations?
Oh, and I love what Moshe said. So I'm just going to expand on that. He mentioned two words that I got a little chuckle out of being from the government side: enabler and enterprise. And the reason I laughed a little bit, because I 100% agree with him that that's what's needed. But the way people hear language and define their terms are differently. So at one agency, it may differ to another, but there's a culture of, well, gee, I'm unique and different, and this is my budget and my program. And when I hear enterprise, you're going to take all that control away from me, and no, thank you, move on. And so trying to get those contrarians or the risk averse or unwilling folks to come along with you, sometimes it's about learning language. So I learned early on that although I know what I mean when I say enterprise, not everyone does. And so I don't make assumptions. I say, well, it's really about building what we have in common. And I think it's about, if you want to adapt standardized processes to optimize, you have to get standardized before you optimize, right? You walk before you run, and you have to foster a passion for dedication and be flexible and adaptive. And if you'll forgive me, it's just a funny little anecdote that I always think of now when I'm speaking on this. So resilience and resourcefulness. If you've ever seen Star Trek 4, I know it's an old movie now, but it's a great example. So the crew travels back in time from 2286 to 1986. And the scenario allows for, character development. They adapt to their new surroundings and face challenges that test their abilities and resourcefulness. What worked in their time period and what they take for granted doesn't work in 1986. And at one point, James Doohan is the actor who plays Scotty, the engineer. He approaches a computer at a polymer plant and he addresses it, "Computer, hello, computer." And the plant manager looks at him like he's crazy. And he's got, lobsters growing out of his ears. And he says, "What the heck do you think you're doing? The keyboard's right there." And the lesson here is, don't assume your tools and resources are the same. You got to lean in and learn. And if you're ahead of the curve, bring your colleagues along with you. And if you don't have the latest in technology, be ready to work from other tools until you can get to that next iteration. And I always just love that example because it makes me laugh, and it also it gives me the power to move through tough spaces when we're really starting from ground zero.
Oh, what a great reference. I want to start off with.
That's right.
That's fantastic. And in building this culture, so much of it is awareness. And I think there's a lot of empowerment in supply chain. And that's why I fell in love with it years ago. And it's funny you mentioned before, the fleet program that was under your supervision. I spent many years in a components fleet program, and that's where I fell in love, like going out to the garages, talking with the managers, and then learning the language of, hey, how do we improve the supply chain in this garage that will ultimately get you better parts faster and cheaper if we all work together. And it took some time to learn that language, but ultimately in that case, it was successful and saved millions of dollars to the government. But I think it's so important to foot stomp that, being able to articulate the value of the supply chain, the impact of the supply chain. And it's such a fantastic discipline because everyone makes a difference and has the ability to have macro level impact. And in this case, on a US and global scale, by improving it, right? By helping the suppliers with more communication, the suppliers helping government with data and information, and ensuring that there's this ecosystem that's successful, right? And that culture that people recognize that they live in that ecosystem, they're a part of it, and where they exist within it.
Okay, so now how can the supplier-buyer relationship work more effectively to achieve a collective supply chain resilience?
I think first and foremost, it's a partnership between the federal sector and the private sector. I don't think that ever stops. It's about continuous conversations and allowing for those open forums. I've been on communications conferences where there has been no dialogue. In fact, the platform has restricted access to chat. I don't think that's useful. I think particularly in a hybrid environment, you want that open dialogue, knowing that you can't answer every single question. Ask for questions in advance that you will showcase. Do real in-person events too, because sometimes it's those sidebars that happen that you have those aha moments and you can take it back to your company or your agency. An example we did here for internal customers as well as our external suppliers, we invited our supplier network on campus to be with our lab managers. And we didn't say, hey, lab managers, this is what you need to buy. They told us, we don't want to be dictating to them what they need for their mission critical research. So allowing that open dialogue between our suppliers and our end customers within the agency prioritized the NIH supply chain. What it also did was it filled a gap that was going away. We had a program that was sunsetting at the agency, not my program, that fulfilled lab managers' needs for equipment freezers. Now you think about lab specimens that need to be kept in specific temperature controlled environments. Decades worth of research can go up in smoke if the freezer fails. So what we did was we found the best pricing through volume discounts, and we said, hey, this program may go away, but we can do direct delivery to you utilizing this supplier network that we have, because we had a multitude across the country. So I think it's inviting your supplier network in with your internal customers. It's also about getting knowledgeable about what's the latest and greatest in that supplier space, because again, we're not the manufacturers. We are trying to get this distributed to our end customer. I think it's also leaning in with industry associations. Let industry lead by example. They are by far and away the best innovators. We like to cultivate them into government, and we remember our roots when we come into government. It's so important to keep that connection. So sometimes letting industry tell us, hey, this isn't working for us, but this might. Let's have a conversation. Say yes to the next invitation you get from an industry association, and be ready to have a candid conversation, the good, the bad, the ugly, because that's how we solve problems together.
It would be hard to perfect that answer anymore. That was fantastic. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so now who within an organization should be involved in supply chain risk management?
Everyone. And Moshe, you can expound on that. I think the big thing is, so culture can eat strategy for breakfast, the old phrase. It's really true. So if you really want to drive change, you want to make sure that everyone's invested. To get them invested, you have to tell them what's in it for me. Well, if we don't work at it, we're not going to get the products we need. We're not going to get the services that we need to meet our mission. So that's a pretty big prospect. We are government stewards. We are charged with being stewards of American taxpayer dollars and fulfilling each of our agency's mission. That's a pretty large undertaking. We need partners. And so I would say everyone, but Moshe, please expound.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. I think if we were to try to subdivide it into the organization and how these dynamics work, at the macro level, we know that when the supply chain risk management executive orders and were signed a couple of years ago, it immediately sort of fell to the IT organizations within agencies. And if you work in logistics and you're working in your supply chain, you're like, wait a second, no, come back, right? Come to the logistics organization, right? The procurement organization, the risk organization. And what we're seeing is a bit more of that. I'll call it a correction, right? Where the realization that supply chain risk management, supply chain management is a partnership between all of those main pillars of agencies or companies and the business partners, the mission offices Everybody needs to be a part of it, needs to understand that they are instrumental to its success. And breaking down barriers that may exist between collaboration in those various elements, and understanding that if there's a breakdown in any one of them, it affects the entire supply chain, right? It affects the ability to execute the mission. So I think it's everyone within the ecosystem, a few main drivers, what we see across agencies, and then ultimately the mechanism that's in place that ensures, and the mechanism is a governance mechanism, right, for supply chain risk management that ensures that those processes are taking place, the communication is happening, the data is being shared, that there's a sort of comprehensive approach to supply chain risk management so that everyone is a part and everyone benefits.
Okay, so now what's one way we could improve the data flow between suppliers and consumers and customers today?
Oh gosh, so little time. So I think recognizing the gaps that we have is one, and we're doing that. So there's IT modernization. It's not modernization for its own sake. It's thoughtful and deliberative too. We have the policy, FITARA, FISMA. We've got all these implications that we need to meet, right? Mandates that we need to meet, but we also have to make it accessible. So I think it's first of all getting enterprise architecture out there. My system within my organization should be able to speak across NIH and all of HHS and vice versa. We shouldn't have these organic homegrown little patch and fix things. Software as a service, it's very flexible and adaptive. These are great things, and it helps bring systems together, as it were, and helps that communication flow. But what we need to do is establish, first of all, here's one repository, single source of truth. Here's how we define success in the government. If you want to do business with the government, these are the things that you need to meet. And we do a good job of that in saying things like, okay, you have to be registered in sam.gov. Okay, great. But what about, recognizing trends that are on the horizon? I think there's got to be a way that is both safe and secure and meets all the requirements that government has for IT infrastructure that can also share data. And we also have to build a level of trust that says, okay, suppliers, if you share this information, we're not going to go sharing it out to your competitors. We are using it for the following 3 reasons. It also can't be burdensome. So make it have an intake flow that's actionable, it's in real time, and it doesn't require hours of uploads. This is something that we're all working on across different agencies, and I think there's a lot of smart people in the IT portfolios that are doing a phenomenal job. What we need to do better, I think, as an enterprise, is make sure that we're utilizing the tools that we have with the budgets that we have. So clear guidance, enterprise architecture, I think, utilizing the cloud and having shared metrics so that we don't have suppliers guessing at what is needed and what we're requesting. And similarly, if they've asked a question of us, that we are delivering it in the format that is actionable for them so they don't have to translate it on their end. And it's easier said than done. Like I said, I'm not the smartest person in the room for IT, but those are my broad, big picture brushstrokes of what I see.
Yeah, and I would say from the technological architecture of this, recognizing IT is constantly evolving, and the speed in which you're getting a tool, into the architecture, into your environment, sometimes can be quick on the commercial side, and even there are delays, and sometimes much slower on the government side. So I think recognizing that creating a platform that shared data and information can be convened, can be analyzed, right, and that you can essentially have an iterative approach to introduce new data sets, right, introduce new information that may not be coming from a system, right, that may be coming from organic analysis that occurs from the business, from the agency, that is complementary to what industry is providing, what government is providing, and coalesce into this this one source of truth, as Beth, you had said, for supply chain risk management. So I think that everything ends ensuring that you have this iterative medium where you can introduce new data sets, you can introduce human intelligence, right, you can coalesce in this information to make meaningful decisions, and then seeing the trends that are happening in the future, right, with natural language processing, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. These are all factors that are playing into supply chain risk management, and ensuring that your architecture and your processes and your governance and your supply chain practitioners that are now knowledgeable, right, about all these issues, they can, take advantage of those innovations and of those keep up meaningfully, right? Not just, doing it to do it, but actually doing it in a way that complements this comprehensive picture of supply chain risk management.
Okay, so now how can procuring what agencies need be more efficient, agile, and changing operational environments?
That's a really loaded question, Marianne. Wow, so much to unpack there. I think we've touched on a lot of that. It, First of all, coming from an 1102 background, I really feel what 1102s are feeling today, and I recognize it. I think when you've grown up in industry and gone to different agencies in different programs and through acquisitions and policy, you see different perspectives. So I think to support the acquisitions process, they need the tools and technology. But the tools and technology are only going to be as useful as how do I apply this policy or these 300,000 policies into this acquisition? What am I purchasing? If it's IT, there's a whole set of rules. If it's a high risk contract in enterprise supply chain risk management, there's a whole nother set of rules. And so how does one person become responsible for all of that? We push a lot on our acquisition professionals, and it's not really fair. So what we need to do is invite them in as we're building policies and ask them to kick the tires, as it were. How is this going to apply practically for you? Does it look good? No, it doesn't. We need to change this. Let's adjust here. Or can I meet the spirit of this mandate by doing it in one of several different ways? Allow them to be creative and flexible within the guidelines and parameters of a regulation. So you need IT support, you need strong tools and resources, you need to support your acquisition professionals to be creative, you need to have clear guidance. So from the policy to the application, you have to have this decision tree that makes sense. Did you do all the following checks? Here are your resources to meeting that. You do not have to do the supply chain risk assessment yourself. You come to the Supply Chain Risk Management Council and you say, look, I'm doing a pre-award. I have this company. I know it meets the threshold of a critical contract. So can you do this for me? And then that team has to make sure that they're doing it in a reasonable amount of time, that it doesn't affect the acquisition lead time. So learning from your customer's experience, which is sometimes also our workforce, we can be either or. I think just keeping in mind others' perspectives as we're trying to implement. And then also informing them ahead of the curve. We have an acquisition management council here at NIH that involves all of our contracting acquisition directors across the ICs that are responsible for purchases on behalf of the agency, whether it's services, R&D or products. And so making sure that we share with them what's the latest in our policies and our procedures and our processes, and ask them, invite them into this process and say, how do we get to better? Here's our baseline. How do we get to optimize? And they're really good contributors, and they want to be those innovators and creators, and they want the latitude to do it. So I think it's just finding the right forum to share that information and having them test it out before we implement, because they are going to be the biggest users of that.
And from the industry perspective, I think first and foremost, it's ensuring that the procurement organizations know and understand the capabilities that exist for any of the industry partners, right? What are the areas you're specializing in? Where is your company going? And as it relates to the requirements that are out there from a particular agency or business, right? What are the agency needs? Clearly articulated. Here are the problems that we're trying to solve. And they don't have to be specific requirements, but rather here are the problems. Creating that dialogue where businesses and industry get to say, like, oh, I have a solution that solves this problem, or I don't, and I'm going to focus in in other areas and reprioritize. I think that sort of dialogue is extremely important. From an industry perspective, like, significant decisions are made based upon these dialogues. Investments in infrastructure, investments in people, investments in training, investments in R&D. And and I'll say the big we, in the commercial environment, are doing this all the time. We're deciding, okay, well, here's a problem that needs to be solved. I'm going to start spinning up these investments, bringing on our subject matter experts, honing in on this part of our organization and trying to, essentially collaborate effectively so we can drive and solve that problem, right? That's what we're effectively trying to do. In order to solve the problem, you have to know it, right? You have to have then there's some sort of certainty that you're even going to have the opportunity to try to compete to solve that problem. And I think that's sort of a massive problem that exists across government, is that, it's hard in some cases to just be able to submit a proposal, because of one variation or another. So ensuring that there's a dialogue from the government side that says, okay, here are key buyers that specialize in this particular area. They know what my problem set is. I think that they would be great. So, there's this, consistent, industry, government, or even business, collaboration along the way. And from an industry perspective, planning effectively, communicating with the government, using these associations to, to even articulate in some cases, what have we done? Where are there best practices or stories that similar organizations that would be meaningful and helpful for a client base? These are some of the considerations that are necessary in order to make this partnership work overall.
Okay, so this has been a really great conversation. Is there anything else either of you would like to add?
I do, just riffing off of what Moshe said. I get really energized by the engagement from industry as well as government. He mentioned solving problems. That's really at the heart of this. When we talk about innovation, it is not a complicated, mystical word. Some folks think, oh, I'm not an innovator. I'm not creative. That's beyond me. I'm not a Picasso. You don't have to be a Picasso. You have to be willing to solve a problem, and you're not alone. There's other like-minded people who are willing to lean in, and they say great minds think alike, but they also think differently. And that's where we get the innovation, those synergies of bouncing ideas back and forth and saying, it didn't work here, but it might work over there. Let's try it. And it's being curious and willing to engage. So we can all be innovators. And that's something to keep in mind in our everyday lives.
The last thing I add, it's such a pleasure to be able to speak with Beth on this podcast. And I think every conversation we have, we're just, really driving a really innovative and fun conversation on supply chain management, supply chain risk management. It's a dynamic topic. It's interdisciplinary. Every aspect that is going on in the world right now affects supply chain management, affects supply chain risk management, and bringing that thought process, that culture, and that approach to driving and solving these problems, bring in innovations as well as subject matter expertise is what is going to drive more effective resiliency along our supply chain and collaboration between everyone.
Great. Well, Moshe, Beth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to Keeping IT Brief. We hope you enjoyed this episode and got some valuable insights. Don't forget to subscribe to Keeping IT Brief on all of your favorite platforms, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. Hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with the latest trends, industry news, and insider tips. We'll be back with more exciting episodes, so make sure you're plugged in. Until next time, keep IT brief and keep it exciting.